Discipleship. The cost of discipleship. Let's read this. Luke chapter 14, verse 25 through 33. Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or, what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Now, in this passage, the word disciple is used 3 times, and we're going to get into those usages here in a minute. It's in verse 26, verse 27, and verse 33. And each time, it's in reference to the process or a concept regarding discipleship. Okay? If you can't do these things, then you cannot be my disciple. All right? And that's in verse 26, 27, and 33. And we're going to talk about those here in a moment. But first, let's consider this. The making and transforming of disciples or discipleship. So if you will, keep your finger there in Luke. Turn to Mark chapter 3. Mark chapter 3. We're going to answer the question, who makes disciples and who does the transforming work when it comes to this idea or concept of discipleship? Okay, and the easy answer is Jesus, but there's some nuances here that I want to cover. Chapter 3, verse 13. And he went up on the mountain and called to him those he desired, and they came to him. We don't know what mountain Jesus went up on, what hillside or whatever, and we don't know the number of people that he called to him. But we know that he calls a number of people to him, and out of that number, when we get into verse 14, he appointed 12 whom he named apostles. Okay? This is the first time in the book of Mark that the word apostles is used. It's only used twice. The second time is in chapter 6. All other times when you're considering the 12 apostles in the book of Mark, you have to look at context to determine if Mark is talking about the actual 12 disciples, apostles, or disciples in general of those people that are following Jesus. But understand here that when Jesus, he's calling, and you can even go back to chapter 2 when he's calling the first apostles, those 4 fishermen, he's calling them to himself. And he's called a crowd to himself. And out of that, he designates 12 to be apostles to do what? At the end of verse 14, so that they might be with him. I'm reading from the ESV today. So that they might be with him and he might send them out to do what? To preach. Okay. Now, think back to my Costco analogy. I can pay my membership and never step foot in that store again, and I can still be considered a member of Costco. Right? If the apostles took this line of thinking with Jesus, could they have done the things that they did in the book of Acts? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Turn to Acts chapter 4. Acts chapter 4. At the beginning of Acts chapter 4, this is Peter and John. They're going out and they are speaking to the people and the priests and the captain and the temple and the Sadducees. They're proclaiming Jesus and His resurrection. And the Sanhedrin and the leading Jewish authorities of the day, they get their feathers ruffled. And so they have Peter and John arrested, and then they come before the Sanhedrin the next day and capture the statement that Peter and John make at the very end of their defense, and it's in verse 12. And there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Now that's a powerful statement, especially when you consider the fact that it was the Sanhedrin that had Jesus killed. And when you look back at history, and each time there's been a rebellion or a revolt that's been led, and the leader has been killed, the followers have been dispersed. Not so with Jesus. Jesus has been crucified, and his followers have grown, and they've become more bold. And so they make this statement, and at the end there, in verse 13, here's what the Sanhedrin sees. Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, and perceived that they were what? Uneducated, common men, they were astonished, and they recognized that they had been with who? With Jesus. They had been with Jesus. You see, the apostles could not get to where they were in Acts if they did not spend the time with Jesus the previous 3.5 years. It doesn't work. And so it's Jesus that is making the disciples, but it's also Jesus that is doing the transforming work. Now here's the nuance, right? Consider the Great Commission, Matthew chapter 28, verse 18 and following. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and earth is being given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. So who makes disciples? Disciples do. We do. We take that on, but we take that on from the standpoint that we are taking what to the nations? The Word, which is the gospel, which is Jesus. I like that word. You know, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus. We are taking Jesus. So it's still, in a way, we are presenting the gospel message. We are presenting Jesus as disciples to make disciples, but it's still Jesus that's making the disciples. And it's also still Jesus that's doing the transforming work. You get into verse 20, and teaching them everything I have commanded you. We are teaching what? What the Word teaches. We're teaching Jesus. Okay? And so, it's through that process of spending time with Jesus in the Word, in a context like this, in fellowship, through prayer, and we can go on and make a pretty long list there. But when we do that, then Jesus is the one that's doing the transforming work. All right, so making and transforming. Let's get into what all this means. Let's look at verse 26 in Luke. Oh, I got to find it. There it is. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my what? Disciple. This has always been a difficult passage for me. This has always been a difficult verse for me. And it's been a difficult verse for me for a lot of reasons, but the main reason is that most of my family are Christians. Most of my family goes to church. And so when I look at this verse and I see this verse and Jesus is like, hey, you got to hate your mother and your father and your brothers and your sisters and on and on, in-laws. I better say that one. They're in here today. You have to hate those folks. I don't hate you. I love you. That's hard for me because most of my family are Christians. So what is Jesus saying here? Easy, love less, yes. Different levels of love. And so this is David Garland, his commentary on the book of Luke. Let's read this. Jesus is using hyperbole to capture the seriousness of his demand. To hate does not refer to enmity, but it is a Semitic expression that conveys indifference to one and preference for another. I love A and hate B, which means I prefer A to be. And the examples that we can use there is Genesis 29, when Jacob is with Lot and they're trying to figure out what goats Jacob gets. And so Jacob's like, well, I'll take the speckled ones and the striped ones and the spotted ones, all the ones that are of lesser value, I'll take those. And Jacob, you can keep the ones that are more valuable to you. It's not that Lot values, he prefers the choice goats over the less choice goats. It's not that he hates those goats. They're still valuable. He can still get something for those speckled goats. But if Jacob is going to take those goats out of his flock so that his goats can continue to grow in number and have those solid goats and all that stuff, great. Or consider Romans 9:13 when Paul is talking about Rebekah and when it says, as it is written, Jacob I have loved, Esau I have hated. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know any parent, any mother that hates their children. And so I think this Semitic expression and understanding this is that Rebekah still loves Jacob. She still loves Esau. She prefers Jacob. And maybe, not that I'm saying that this is anybody in here, there's some favoritism that's playing out there. Parents do tend to have favorites. Not all parents, some parents do. So that helps me understand this a little bit better. But it's still difficult, and I'll get to that in a second. Turn to Mark chapter 3 again. Mark chapter 3. In the book of Mark, there is a theme that runs through the book of Mark, and it's a theme of discipleship. And in the book of Mark, discipleship is determined by one's proximity to Jesus. The closer you are to Jesus, the more likely it is that you are one of His disciples. The farther away you are, you're just a spectator. Maybe you're an outsider. So there's also a theme within discipleship of insiders versus outsiders that runs through the book of Mark. Okay? And so we're going to see that here. Verse 31 of chapter 3. And his mother and his brothers came, and standing where? They're standing outside. They sent to him and called him, and a crowd was sitting around him. And they said to him, your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you. Now capture what Jesus says here. And he answered them, who are my mother and my brothers? And looking about at those who sat around him, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother. So in this episode, we have Jesus, Luke chapter 14, he's saying, if you don't hate your family, and I'm paraphrasing there, then you can't be my disciple. Here in Mark, his brothers and his mother are outside. And he's saying, no, it's those that are doing the will of my Father. Those are the ones that are my brothers or my sisters and my mother. And so in this, he's illustrating the fact that the preference, in order to be a disciple of Jesus, is that Jesus has to take preference over your family. And then those that are disciples here in Mark, it's that those who are doing the will of the Father and sitting at Jesus' feet in proximity to Him and learning from Him, teaching everything I have commanded you, those are my disciples. Okay? This verse is still difficult for me, and here's why. I think in the first century, and even today to some degree, when somebody would come and say to their family, listen, I'm going to follow Jesus Christ. I've been paying attention to Him, and I've been listening to His disciples, and He's the real deal. Now, in the first century, families were very loyal to their gods or a god. If you were in the Roman Empire, you had the Roman gods, and if you were regional, you might have different regional gods and things like that. And so when you came to your family that was very devout towards whatever god it was that they were worshiping, and you said, I'm going to follow Jesus, it was a slap in the face to the family. And so that does cause, in some instances, enmity and strife within a family. Consider present day. Countries in the Middle East, and you get into Asia. Those countries where Buddhism or Taoism, these major world religions, Muslim or Islam, if somebody were to go to their family in those instances and say, hey, I'm going to be a Christian, I'm going to follow Jesus, a lot of times that individual will be disowned, ostracized, kicked out of the family. You're left to fend for yourself. You will get no help from this family. And in some cases, what will happen is what's known as an honor killing. So somebody in that family will say, you have ruined the honor of our family, and a member will kill that person who has become a Christian in order to save face or to save the honor of the family. And then nobody is charged with murder because it's an honor killing. So this verse for me is still difficult to process knowing that. But I like this right here, knowing that it's a Semitic expression. I prefer A to B. Our preference is to be Jesus Christ and the will of the Father. That should be number one over our family. And that's hard to do at times. Okay, let's look at verse 27, personal goals and desires. Verse 27. Oh, I'm in Mark. There's Luke. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, to help us understand this a little bit better, turn over to Luke chapter 9 and consider what Jesus says there about carrying a cross. Luke chapter 9, verse 23. And he said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. So in this verse 23 here, what we see is that Jesus is saying you have to deny yourself. And so when it comes to being a disciple of Jesus, it's not what I want. It's not the things that I want to do or my goals or my desires, but instead it's trying to be formed and shaped and molded into the image of Jesus Christ. And it becomes, when I'm doing that, then what my goals and my desires are the will of the Father. Make sense? So maybe we think of it this way. Jesus expects nothing that he has not already accepted for himself. He's not going to ask us to do anything that he hasn't done himself. I think the only exception to that would be crucifixion, right? When Peter says, I'm going with you to the cross, Jesus, and Jesus makes that statement. He says, can you drink the same cup that I'm going to drink? And he tells him, no, you can't. So, yes, I could be crucified. I can hang on a cross, but the one thing I can't do is save the world. Only Jesus does that. But he was not a passive victim, but incited the world against himself by his message and the life he lived. His crucifixion in Jerusalem did not happen to him as the act of an evil destiny. According to the Gospels, Jesus himself set out for Jerusalem, and you see that in Luke chapter 13, verse 22. And he actively took the expected suffering upon himself. So in this, what Jesus is doing is that he is taking that cross up. He knows what's coming. He predicted his death how many times before he was crucified? 3 times. He predicted his death on the way to Jerusalem. And so he knows, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's praying. What does he pray? Let this cup pass from me. But it's your will, Father, that I will do. And so we even know that Jesus, in that instant, in that moment, he doesn't want to be crucified, but he is about what? The will of the Father. We know the song, we sing it. He could have called 10,000 angels. But He didn't. He died for you and me. He's about the will of the Father. And so what Jesus is demonstrating in this, in verse 27 here, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. He is saying that the will of the Father is what's most important. I have to deny myself. It's not what I want and my dreams and all of those things. Instead, it's what the will of the Father is. And Jesus even demonstrates that for us in following through with the will of the Father with regards to the cross and His crucifixion. So can we deny ourselves to be a disciple? That's the question that we have to answer in that. All right, let's look at this next one. Verse 33. Personal possessions. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. It's easy for us to sit here and think, well, it's just material possessions. And we also say things like, we came into the world with nothing and we're going to leave the world with nothing. And so we know all those phrases and everything, but maybe we consider it like this for us. Brittany and I, we both have two boxes in our garage, and it's all of our keepsake stuff that we keep in those boxes, and they're full of memories, is what it is. And so it's memories from when we were in school. Elementary, middle, high school, into college, things like that. We have those two boxes. I think the last time we opened them is when we were cleaning out our attic in Mississippi, getting ready to move. We're like, what's in these boxes? Oh, we can't throw that stuff away. Because they present or represent memories. Maybe there's things that have been passed down to you through your family generations that just have a lot of sentimental value. And in that sentimental value, it creates an enormous amount of value. And I can't get rid of this. This was my grandmother's, or this was my uncle's who I dearly loved. I think of my brothers and my dad. My brother Jeremy, he has a 20-gauge shotgun that my grandfather gave him. Beautiful shotgun that he takes hunting all the time, pheasant hunting and whatnot. But he'll never get rid of that because it has a lot of value for him. It's not worth a lot, but there's a lot of sentimental value. Same with my father. He's got a 12-gauge shotgun from his dad, my grandfather, and the way he came about it, his uncle wanted to take him hunting. Well, my grandfather didn't have a shotgun, so he went and bought him one and gave it to him. Beautiful shotgun, probably not worth a lot. And so, but those are things that get passed down through the generations. Can we let go of those things? Can we say this is just stuff, and instead it's not about my wealth or my things or my possessions, but it's about Jesus Christ? And when we start to look at that and start to evaluate that and understanding, okay, where is my loyalty with regard to Jesus in my discipleship and being a disciple of Jesus? I think there's an individual that captures all three of these very, very well. Turn to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10. Trying to gauge and see when that first bell is going to ring. There's a lot of neat stuff that's happening in this passage. This is where Jesus heals blind Bartimaeus. And again, this is the idea, or what's happening here. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. Jesus knows what's going to happen. And so there in verse 46 of chapter 10 in Mark, and they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples, and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. Now again, remember, in the book of Mark, discipleship is determined by one's proximity to Jesus. And so who is on the road with Jesus? His disciples, and there's also a great crowd that's following him. Now, can we say, well, some of that great crowd is probably disciples? Yeah, probably so. The text doesn't tell us. We also know that, you look at John chapter 6, the teachings of Jesus were hard. When he's talking about himself being the bread of life, and he's saying, eat my body, drink my blood, those are hard. And at the end of chapter 6, it says a lot of disciples stopped following him. Okay? So the crowd, what they're waiting to see something cool. They're spectators. They know that, hey, here's this man, he's been performing miracles, and maybe we'll see something. Maybe we'll see some fireworks and something cool happen. And so they're following Jesus, but there's also an individual sitting on the roadside. He's not on the road with Jesus, he's on the roadside. Who is it? Bartimaeus. He's an outcast. He has a disability. He's blind, and he's on the road, on the side of the road, and he's begging. Begging for what? I don't know. I tend to think he's begging for survival. Because in this time period, if you have a disability such as blindness and you don't have family that's helping you, maybe your family is helping you, but you have to survive somehow. And so you beg. And so that's what Bartimaeus is doing. And he's sitting on the roadside, and I'm going to work through this a little bit. And he calls out to Jesus, Jesus, son of Nazareth, Jesus. He calls out to him twice. The first time, the disciples are like, shh, be quiet. Jesus doesn't have time for you. And he calls out all the louder, so much so that Jesus stops. He stops in his tracks, and he looks over and he says, tell him to come here. And when Bartimaeus comes up, Jesus doesn't say, what do you want, man? I've got places to be. I've got to go hang on a cross, and I got to get there, and I'd rather get it done sooner than later. So what is it that you need? That's not what Jesus does here. In verse 51, and Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? You see, in that, Jesus recognizes Bartimaeus as a person, as an individual. He's not an outcast. He's not somebody sitting on the side of the road that's just being loud and obnoxious, and it's like, I don't have time for you, just keep going because I don't want to give you anything. No, what do you want me to do for you? And Bartimaeus could have asked for anything. He could have asked for the world. But he doesn't. He asks to be ordinary. To be like everyone else. Rabbi, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, go your way, your faith has made you well. Go your way, your faith has made you well. And Bartimaeus immediately receives his sight. Now there's the Greek there for made you well has a dual meaning. The first meaning is physical healing. And so that's what's happened with Bartimaeus. He received his sight, and so he has been physically healed. He can now see, and he can go home. There's the other meaning to this Greek phrase, and that is spiritual healing. So Jesus not only takes care of the physical needs of Bartimaeus, he also takes care of the spiritual needs of Bartimaeus. There's only one person that can take care of both of those things, and that's Jesus Christ. And in that, I imagine that Bartimaeus, as he sits on the roadside day after day, we don't know how long he had been blind, but he sits on the roadside day after day after day, and he's begging. He's begging for survival, but I imagine he's also dreaming. He's dreaming of what it would be like to see the faces of his loved ones. Maybe his parents or his siblings or his wife or his children. The text doesn't tell us what kind of family he has, but maybe he's dreaming of seeing his family. Maybe he has dreams of, if I could just see, I would do this. If I could just see, I would go here or there or do that. If I could just see, and he has these dreams and these aspirations, if he could just see. If I could see, man, I would go home and I could enjoy the flowers in my yard. And I don't know if they had flowers in yards back then, but I could enjoy those things and I could play with my dog and I can... He has these dreams and aspirations. But what does Bartimaeus do? You see, Jesus has given him license and permission to go his own way, to go home. But he doesn't do that. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. Bartimaeus moves from the side of the road, and he is now on the road with Jesus, in proximity to Jesus, and he is a disciple. He doesn't go home to his family because Jesus is his number one preference. He doesn't go home and begin to do all the things that he has a preference for in terms of his goals and his desires. No, his preference is Jesus in doing the will of the Father as Jesus demonstrates. So he gets on the road. He doesn't go home and enjoy his house and all of his possessions. He leaves that all behind. He renounces it and he gets on the road and he follows Jesus because Jesus is his preference. So when we consider the cost of discipleship, what are we willing to give up? What Jesus tells us here in Luke chapter 14, that he is to be number one in all areas of our life. All areas. Not just this little bit on a Sunday morning or this little bit on a Wednesday night or this little bit when I get with my family. All of it. Not to say that we can't enjoy our family or have dreams and goals and aspirations or to enjoy our homes. That's not what I'm saying. But if those things take precedence and become number one in our lives, then Jesus is not where he is supposed to be. And so are we willing to give all of that up? Think of it this way. And I'll end, and the lesson is yours, and you can get up and visit. Jesus is our example that we always say that we follow. We are to follow the example of Jesus. We are to follow the example of Jesus. He is our roadmap. He is our guide. We follow his example. Well, guess what? When it comes to discipleship, Jesus left everything in heaven to come to this earth. If you think about that, we talk about heaven being something so wonderful and amazing that we can't even put in the words what it's going to be like. Well, that's what Jesus left behind to come to this earth. To be that ultimate sacrifice for you, for me, for all of us. Are you willing to leave everything behind on this earth to go to heaven? Because that's the cost of discipleship. The lesson is yours.